If the Supreme Court made a decision...
Thank you, Aaron. I think we're finished.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cohen, you're doing that.
Well, I'm sorry that you constantly re-argue the point. You're liable because the law says that you're liable, and the courts say the law says you're liable, and that's why you're liable.
You see, he's talking about the lower courts, who are not in compliance with the Supreme Court, as they have to be.
Doesn't the court have to be in compliance with the Supreme Court?
The Supreme Court has so held.
Where?
You've caught me unprepared.
I'll come back.
I don't want to do that.
But let me ask you a hypothetical question.
No. You're making silly arguments here.
Why is the Supreme Court decision a silly argument?
Well, because it's inapplicable.
That made my heart stop. He just said Supreme Court decisions do not apply to the IRS. That's the behavior you would expect from a totalitarian country, maybe China or Russia or Cuba. Not from America. They're just making up the law as they go along. Now I knew the tax honesty movement was right. The IRS thrives on intimidation and fear, not by law. It's no different than a criminal protection racket, using force to extract your money from you. Then the former IRS commissioner, now working at a prestigious Washington law firm, threatens me. Watch.
Aaron, you understand Yiddish. Cornish to helfen.
For those of you who don't understand Yiddish, that means nothing will help you.
We are still a slave to the money. And that means every man, woman, and child who pays income tax is a slave.
Thus, the argument of the film is that the income tax is unconstitutional, which it very well may be, especially if the 16th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution was never properly ratified. However, claims that income tax is illegal may be wrong when you realize that the system depends on all human beings signing up to act as taxpayer corporations and thereby accept tax liabilities. The law is purposely complicated to thwart investigation by the layman and protect the integrity of a system that is built upon quicksand. Canada is in the same boat, where the country's income tax is a 2,000-plus page monstrosity, complicated to the point of causing an aneurysm. Both the United States and Canadian law, and probably a lot of other countries as well, specify in their income tax laws that all government employees are income taxable in order to help pay for government. That is why you must pay. As a citizen, you are a government employee. The main deception comes from layering the law that allows collecting of regular corporate income tax from actual companies and then applying that law to collect tax from the citizen who's ignorant of his or her employee status.
Maybe it's just a way to keep us in a climate of fear and keep our minds off the fact that central bankers run everything, run the mass media, run the education system, and we are not really free. We are free in that people like you and I can say what we want, but we will never get heard beyond a limited audience. We'll never get paid like for doing what we're doing. I'm not paid, you're not paid.
Why do you think you've been able to get away with not paying or filing your income taxes for so long?
Well, first of all, I've not gotten away with anything. I'm not hiding from anyone. I'm simply asking the IRS to show me the laws that apparently require me to do these things, and they are suspiciously reticent to answer questions from me, and of course there are millions of other people, many other organizations who have attempted to get answers. They act very suspiciously when asked to simply sit down at the table with the American people and discuss what their obligations are. Rather than pulling up a chair, they pull out a club.
Because our country's bankrupt, and if you don't believe me, why do we have a receiver general? If we're in receivership, our country's in receivership, so what they do is they take all our income tax money, every dime of it, forward it to the United Nations forwards it to the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and then they will back our ability to work against Canada's ability to pay through our labors, because they get it first, and then they go to the Bank of Canada and say, okay, Canada can borrow money again. And they track all this by our SIN number, birth certificate number, and we also have a bond number.
At the same time, many of the most wealthy and well-known corporate brand companies set up shell and holding companies in countries with tax shelters and hold billions in assets, avoiding the legal corporate income tax in a maze of hierarchical company ownerships and stock percentage manipulations. Some wizened citizens even change their residency to other low-tax countries and then just live as a human in the United States or Canada, making millions, if not billions, of dollars of low-tax or tax-free money running their business through this country. The argument for abolishing the income tax makes sense when you consider the following. The income tax provides for not one service in government. Not one wage, school, road, hospital, salary, or program is paid for by the income tax. The roads are paid for by gas taxes. Education is paid for by property taxes. The military is paid for by legal corporate income tax. Hospitals and healthcare are paid for by lotteries and excise taxes on alcohol and cigarettes. City infrastructure is paid for by violation tickets, fines, and fees. The goods and service tax, along with provincial and state taxes, pay for the majority of other services we enjoy. And so they should, as they are mandatory taxes applied to almost everything we buy. Income tax, however, applies only to paying the interest on the national debt, nothing else. The debt never goes down, and some people wonder why income tax feels like perpetual slavery. It literally is. Think about it. Money not paid to the government as income tax, where it subsequently goes to private bankers as profit, will inevitably be spent on some sort of good or service that will still be taxed. So it's not as if removing income tax, allowing us all to earn and keep more money, and abolishing the national debt would wreck our nations. If anything, they could become prosperous once more. However, if we like the concept of half the wealth being owned by less than 1% of the population, I guess we'll just have to keep things the way they are. Thankfully, there are groups who are not only trying to educate people of these legal shenanigans, but are actively in court themselves, advocating, defending, and letter writing. Around the world today, many activist groups have been popping up. A lot of these have been focusing specifically on the freedom movement, such as Canada's Think Free organization and also the Elizabeth Ann Elaine Society, who are advocating going back to sovereignty status, firing the government, and becoming what is recognized as a free man on the land, a designation whereby an individual is recognized no longer as a person in law or a natural person, but a free human living on land, not bound by any act or statute, nor any governing body or corporate entity. Robert Arthur Menard explains how he went through the process.
In my research, I found that people used to use notices of understanding and intent and claims of right all the time. If there was a conflict, if they wanted to avoid conflict or ensure that if there was a conflict, they came out on top, they would serve what was called the notice of understanding and intent and then the claim of right. You do that now with the government. You create a document that expresses your understanding, expresses your intent, what your actions are, and then you claim the right to do that. You go through the notarial process and you serve notice to them and you give them a chance to dispute. If they don't dispute, then the notary crafts a document saying they were served, they had a chance to dispute. They didn't, he wins. So it's a very simple process. It's as easy as saying to the host of a house, hey buddy, it's time for me to leave, I'm leaving, have a good day.
Totally eliminate the corporate rule and get back to rule by the people who are prepared to change our system so that there's an accountability that goes right back to the people, where people can even recall their MPs if they don't do as they promised to do, and a whole restructuring of the apparatus of government, the officials and the bureaucrats who work in there, who right now are accountable and serve the interests of the corporate elite rather than the interest of the people of Canada, not the government of Canada, but the people of Canada. We should go back to requiring them to take an oath of allegiance to serve the common good and to do their public duty. Those are things that can be done and should be done. And so it's a question of getting back in and taking control and reasserting ourselves. It can be done.